Hello hero, it's Lucy Lannon. Let's get some guidance, possibly on a spiritual level, from this Twin Peaks Magician Longs to See deck. If you're seeing this live, happy Halloween. There are a few readings going out today to make up for days that I've missed over the Utober period, because I did want to do one a day and then I had some health issues kind of mid-month, so there should be enough in the playlist that there is one for every day now, but that means that on Halloween, like, there's 4 or 5 going up. There's a love transmission, a family reading, there's one sort of pertaining to where you stand in a situation of leaving something behind. There's this, and hopefully one more which is a pick-a pile about your resources. So do check those out if any of those things might resonate with you, particularly if you're new to me. Hello. And I want to say to my returning subscribers, or to the people that have subscribed over this month has been a bit of a slog because of the health stuff that I didn't expect, and I really appreciate you being here, and I'm glad that you've found value in the content so far. I am delighted to have had more people viewing, talking to me, and just sort of interacting in a general way, because it means that I know that I'm doing something right here. So thank you, love you, keep watching, keep feeding back about what you enjoy most, what kinds of readings you want to see, even subjects of upcoming readings that you want me to do kind of on a request basis, providing that they're general. I'd love to see all that stuff in the comments. So yeah, thank you. I think this is it for, like, oh no, there's one more for initial situation, and then we'll get more as we go. Before I begin, I've been forgetting to say this, but this is a general reading for a large audience, so take what resonates and leave the rest for someone else who will need that bit, right? So particularly because on this channel I do read for several different paradigms. We have Christians, we have Satanists, we have witches, magicians, broadly spiritual people, atheists who just want a thought experiment. All are welcome, right? But I'm going to speak in a sort of broad way so that each of those people relates to this, how it's meant for them, okay? All right, I'll just be a second meditating on these cards, and there'll be a quick cut which you won't feel. All right, guys, I'm back. The first thing I want to say, which was more a message than from spirit, than something I'm seeing in the cards, is that if you're a meditator or a practitioner and you are not regularly grounding, that is the first thing that needs seeing to. Because as well as meditating on these, I had to do some grounding myself. I had to go eat. I had to make sure I wasn't lightheaded in a spiritual sense, not in a physical sense, because I had just eaten. It's not like a blood sugar thing or anything, but energetically I felt a bit sort of cord cut from my earth, from present, from place. That sometimes happens when you're doing a lot of energy work, or where you're reading for a lot of different energies. You kind of get a bit disattached from when and where you are, which is appropriate for this deck because it always makes me think of David Bowie's character. Come on, brain. Philip Jeffries, right, when he's unstuck in time, spoilers, and sort of going from thing to thing. It sometimes feels a bit like that energetically when you're doing this kind of stuff. And if that resonates with you as well, I want to say, you know, do grounding in whatever your way is. So for some of you, it will be walking barefoot on the ground, on natural ground. For some of you, it will be taking a walk in nature. For some of you, it will be dancing to extremely loud music, whether in headphones or not. For some of you, it will be eating, as I did. For some of you, it will be doing the sort of initial bits of the LBRP without the archangelic stuff, right? The sort of drawing up from Malkut and kind of sending the light into your body from the earth. Or it will be related meditations of growing cords from your feet or from your tailbone through the ground down into the core of the earth, and kind of wrapping tendrils around that to make sure that when you're drawing up energy from the planet, you are kind of firmly anchored before you do any work that sends you off and away. Now, that is partly reflected in the cards in a way, but it's because I think that this overall spread relates to some of your fears about practice, whether they be conscious or not, affecting how well it is that you descend in a meditation kind of a context. Excuse me, hiccups are my confirmation thing, and you'll get a few of those throughout this, I'm sure. They seem to be going wild today. I can't imagine why. Okay, so firstly we have the Hanged Man. It is Dr. Jacoby, so he's more of a spiritual ilk anyway, right? Even if he's on the kind of crazy conspiracy side of things at the same time, he's very tuned in other ways. And with it being the Hanged Man, this is the meditator, this is the spiritual or sacrificial figure, this is your Jesus, your Odin, your king under the mountain kind of a figure. And Dr. Jacoby is an interesting take on the modernity of that, which I would love to explore in conversation in the comments if you're a Twin Peaks fan. But that's outside the realms of this reading. And what I want to say is that this is some kind of descent practice. And when I say descent, I don't mean, you know, hellish, or I don't mean descending in a negative sense. I mean going deep into self, or deep into consciousness, or merging with an overall consciousness in a way that is not physical. So we're not talking, for instance, somatic practice, we're not talking trance work through dance, anything like that sort of stuff. We're talking stuff where you're laying or sitting or even standing for some of you, and going into the depths of your own unconscious, subconscious. For some of you, I'm hearing flotation tanks. I've sort of turned my bathroom into like a makeshift flotation thing, having seen Atlanta, and really loved the idea and gone, that's what I need to do next. And it is bomb, but I don't recommend a DIY setup just because saline levels and all that. It's just, you know, for some of you, I'm hearing that's how you do it. You go in a dark room, you float in some water, and your mind goes off. For others of you, you are doing some kind of Hemisync type stuff, or you're doing guided meditations, or you're just doing, you know, your classic meditation, your mantra repetition, TM with Lynch being here, or something where you're observing your thoughts, allowing them to leave you, and sort of living in the void that is left when those things depart. All of which I want to say is fantastic. Keep doing it. And if you haven't started doing it, this reading is universe nudging you into, like, seriously though, you've been thinking about this for a while, just go do it. But I think, you know, the majority of people I'm speaking to, even if it's just in like a prayer and silence sense, you're doing some kind of meditative work. Now, what I want to say next is that there's either a block in the information that you're receiving with this kind of stuff going into Mark Frost as he's writing Twin Peaks, and with the, you know, the Telegraph radio stuff as well. There's either a block in the signal in that sense, or you're trying to put this practice into a journal or into some form of practical, very sort of right-handed, very solar rather than lunar output, right? You're trying to do lunar things through a solar mechanism. So you're journaling, for example, or perhaps automatic writing or something like that for some of you, maybe even painting. And you're trying to kind of you're bringing up ideas from the unconscious or from the all or from God or whatever it is that you want to call it onto paper through that. But it's almost like the spirituality of the message is not coming through properly. And my feeling on that, if that's you, and if you're trying to get in touch with stuff via a very physical means, is that the physicality is where you're going wrong, because you need to separate in some way from your body. And not in a dangerous way, not in a way where you're untethered, right? But just you need to not be embodied in an active way in order to receive mental and spiritual realizations. So it would be far better if you're a journaler, an automatic writer, an artist, a dancer even, you know, whatever it is that you do, to still your practice and to put it into a completely mental, visionary or auditory realm. I know that, like, I'm instantly hearing the cry of some of you that you don't think you're clairvoyant, you don't think you're claircognizant, clairaudient, whatever it is, all of the clairs, right? I can tell you from personal experience that even if you might not feel that you are now, if you're sitting for long enough with the intention that something comes, it will come. The process is about getting over the hurdle of it being really uncomfortable, waiting on that thing, and facing up to those thoughts that you're having that are doubts about your skill at it, in order that one day the thoughts do vanish and you're suddenly seeing things, experiencing things, hearing things. And I don't mean that in a negative way. And obviously, if you're seeing, hearing and experiencing things that aren't real in your waking life and without a trance state, and you feel that it's appropriate to contact a medical practitioner, do, because I'm not trained in that field. But I'm talking here to people who want to receive a kind of dream state in some way through creative endeavour. The guidance here is that the act of being creative is a kind of outflow, and you're confusing it with a flowing of stuff coming in. And in order for that to come in, you need to be in mode, not out mode. Receiving, not, I wanted to say ejecting, but not expressing, right? So that's how this relates for some of you. For others, where you do meditate, where you are wanting to be adept in the receptive mode, perhaps you do visionary magic, perhaps you're just a meditator from whatever faith. I'm hearing Buddhist for some of you. It's almost like there's a block in the ideas coming and you don't know why. Or there's like a sudden silence where you were getting messages and now it's like you're locked out. That's fine. That's part of this. That's coming across in the reading. It's all natural, my dude. Don't worry about it. Nothing's wrong. But the cards I'm going to come to in a minute will kind of explain why that is, right? So either you're constantly expressing and you need to get into the mode of receiving in a very sort of, no, I'm going to be completely still and just wait here for an hour until something happens way, which, yes, is tedious, but that's enlightenment, you know? Did you think it would be easy? And then others of you who are already on that journey, it's like you were getting really far with it and you felt that you were good at clearing out, sweeping away thoughts, again with the sweeping with Twin Peaks, and you were kind of at a point where you could get to void consciousness very quickly, and then things were coming in a kind of trance state, dream state, in that flotation tank end of Atlanta way, which was all very positive, and then suddenly it was like, bam, it stopped. And you're like, well, why? Why can't I see anything? Why can't I feel anything? Why isn't stuff coming? Have I done something wrong? Have I failed in some way? No. But so the Eight of Wands here with the logging truck, right? At the change of the lights. So already this is an anxious moment in the series, but also we have this idea of these logs toppling out of the truck and sort of rolling along the road, particularly because of the tense angle in the fantastic illustration of this card. And then we have David Lynch as the director filming all of this going on, witnessing whether these things stay in the truck. The way I see these together, as well as the Eight of Wands being about sometimes being trapped or laboured or carrying too much or things happening too fast. Swift messaging is usually the thing. Sometimes too swift, right? If we don't want those messages coming in on an unconscious level. But the way I see it is this director's on set. He's filming this. And for whatever reason, be it the stunt people or safety people or whatever, these aren't correctly tethered. If they come off that truck, they will roll into Mr. Lynch. And then the whole production's fucked, right? Aside from anything else. And that situation expressing itself in that kind of animation in my head leads me to the conclusion that part of the reason that stuff isn't coming in for you is that you feel that this quick movement of messages, ideas, mediumship for some of you, or something along those lines, whatever work you're doing, will somehow roll over you or crush you or happen too fast or be too much, or that you're unlocking a door that should remain closed or opening Pandora's box in some way. Possibly the reason that I mentioned Hemisync and gateway stuff is twofold, in that some people theorize that the reason it was the CIA thing was that actually they're setting up stuff for Hemisync users to encounter, so that people who are curious about that stuff go on the particular CIA journey and are blocked. I think that's a myth, having practiced it myself, but it is a conspiracy theory that's out there. And the other thing about that is that when you do Hemisync, you have a kind of box that acts as like a room 101 for stuff that you want to leave behind before you go into resonance and you start doing practice, which eventually leads to being in multiple locations, psychometry, telepathy, all kinds of cool stuff that you eventually do with that technology, right? The point is that you kind of expunge all of your negs, if you like, into this big box, this big chamber, and then you lock this heavy lid and you turn around, and that's when you begin the process of resonance and sort of align your brain hemispheres and start getting into a trance place. If you're curious, by the way, it really does work. And having done trance work by more traditional means, sorry, I always seem to be doing this. Brief story time, right? Sorry, you can skip ahead. But I'm a person who is a chaos magician, but whose sort of area of focus for the last few years has been traditional witchcraft. That means that I've done a lot of techniques that get you into a very deep trance state very quickly in order to do things like spirit communication or visionary work, or just getting into a place that you need to be in terms of doing astral travel, etc., right? So I'm used to going into those states via different means. I'm also someone who is quite heavily disabled in a very systemic way. So for me, taking any kind of substance that gets you there, be it mushrooms, ayahuasca, acid, anything like that, it's off the table for me. Can't do it. Equally, to my great dismay, the sort of restrictive techniques of people like Austin Osman Spare are off the table because I can't do breath work because I'm already deoxygenated, yeah? And I have stamina problems, so doing things like ecstatic dance work is limited because I exhaust quicker than other people, and that exhaustion has repercussions that sometimes aren't that great. So there's a nervousness that I bring in with those things. Even if I can do them, there's a process of anxiety that says I shouldn't be doing them to get to that point, because then you have, a bad trip because you're kind of worried about your health. So as well as experiencing ways to do this, I've had to rule out a lot of the ways that are the most common, right? A lot of the ways that you realign your nervous system as an able-bodied person are out of the realms of possibility for me. And someone needs to hear that, because for some of you, you're in a similar position where maybe your mates or your coven members or whatever are getting there quickly in a way that you can't get access to, either financially or physically. So firstly, I want to say, that's okay, my dude. There are always ways, and I've found mine, and they can be very quick. Secondly, coming back to this, excuse me, I would say that if you did want to explore things like Hemisync, it's so fast, man. Having been in those states through flotation devices, through personal trance work, through mantra, getting there that way, through the kind of more Buddhist perspective of watching thoughts, sending them off, eventually getting to void, speeding that up over a number of years, visualizations, all of it, right? I've tried every which way. Honestly, Hemisync is one of the quickest ways that I feel in my body that I am no longer tethered. And, the sort of sensations that you get in that state between waking and sleeping are very physically recognizable for those of us who've been doing this a while. And absolutely listening to those sounds and aligning my brain in that particular way Whether a placebo or not, I don't really give a shit. It gets me there in 5 minutes. So if you're someone who has trouble with other methods, I highly recommend it. The other thing I'll say about that is that you can get the full program for hundreds and hundreds of pounds on the internet, or you can get the full program through exploring places on the internet that have forums that talk about this sort of stuff. And that's all I'm going to say on it, because I don't want any copyright issues with the makers of same, because I believe that it's great work that they've been doing. But, you know, as well as reading all the disclosed CIA stuff before you start and all that sort of stuff, what I would say is, if you think it's out of the realms of possibility for a financial reason, just have a bit more of a careful look around, because you might be in luck, okay? If you're meant to do it, you will. Right, moving forward, I'll probably put a timestamp to end that rant on the Hemisync stuff, but I just feel the need to tell some of you that that's an accessible path for you. We're going to go into this Knight of Wands in reverse with this Seven of Wands. Again, like, there's this feeling of rushing and crushing. There's like, will the messages coming in be overwhelming? Will the stuff be too much information? Will it all come at once? There's a fear about being spiritually crushed by the enormity of what you might let in if you let yourself fully let things in, right? For some of you, there's even fears about possession and stuff, which I think you've probably got from horror movies. Happy Halloween. But if you're doing protection techniques like the LBRP or like light visualization meditations, calling on archangels, etc., before you go in, you don't need to be worried about being taken over, right? You may encounter energetic wayfarers, the occasional parasitic blob, right? But it's not going to be something that can take over your body just because you're meditating, just because you're having mystical experiences, right? It really, these things tend to look for people who aren't doing the work quicker than they look for people who are, and who probably know the right thing to say to call in something to sweep them off, right? So I wouldn't be too afraid from that perspective, but I needed to say that to some of you who've watched far too many scary movies where somebody, you know, goes into a Get Out style trance, which is very much what it feels like, by the way, and then they get taken over by whatever, or they get hypnotized, or any of that bollocks, right? That's part of that is programming to get you not to try it, if I'm honest, societally, right? Part of the reason we re-emphasize these stories and that we demonize folk practices, look at folk horror as a genre in general, but particularly in films about you know, practices in Haiti, etc. Not going to say it, but, you know, a lot of horror films tend to focus on those indigenous practices because they don't want people to have that realm of exploration. And I think there's an agenda there. I'm not going to go further. But look at the extent to which folk magical practices, indigenous practices, are demonized for you, not just by things that we know demonize everything, like Christianity, you know, pop everything into my paradigm and suddenly it's all evil, but also by perspectives that claim to be atheistic or skeptical, but actually draw very heavily on things like horror, right? Not against horror, massive horror fan, just stuff to think about. Where are these fears coming from is what I want to say. And then with these, it's like, again, this momentum of something that you can't control. Note that the knight on the horse riding the fastest is Bob, is the evil of Twin Peaks, right? And he's taking over Sarah, who, again, spoilers for season 3, but Jowday, right? And they are in turn influencing the log, which influences the log lady, the force for good, the high priestess. So it's like saying that if you step into that high priestess space, there is a fear that you have that evil, which debatable as a term outside of Christianity, will come for you or will run away with you. Or even just that if you don't really have a concept like that, that you believe that the thoughts, the impressions, the trance experiences, the spirit experiences that are coming in for you will run away with you to the extent that it causes major situs or psychological damage or a breaking between you and the real world. You know, we've mentioned in the reading a few times things like astral travel, tethering to the body, etc. Physical sensations that are indicative of not just psychological changes, but out-of-body experiences, right? And inducting yourself into those as a matter of choice, yeah, it's terrifying. I'm not saying I've never done it. I do it on the regular. But I mean, perhaps I'm in a position of privilege with that, because I had a lot of times as a kid where I either nearly died or did die in technical senses. And I viewed myself a lot from outside, and I got very used to that whole thing. Not everyone comes from that. Not everyone is comfortable with going off out of their body and doing stuff in the astral. And I think that you are aware on some level that whatever this practice is that you've been doing, the kind of ultimate end of it might be that you float off, right, for a bit. But what I want to say to you is that that doesn't mean you're going to become untethered or unmanageable or out of control. Indeed, many of these practices have mechanisms built into them whereby if you move your physical body, or if you say mentally certain words or prayers or whatever, depending on your paradigm, you will instantly click back into reality, lose all physical sensation of being untethered or floating off or whatever, and be brought back down to earth. And in a way, me talking about grounding in the beginning is not just to ground you in a literal sense of like, come back to body now, body you can rest now, or I'm hearing in Mr. Robot when he's going mind awake, body asleep, which is actually a Hemisync thing as well. But it's that idea of like, I think you have an unconscious fear that if mind is awake and body is asleep for too long, or in too extreme a way, or around stuff that you can't decide whether it's trustworthy or not, that's it, and you're just going to be like, well, one day I'm in a coma, or I'm away from my body permanently, or whatever. And what I want to say to you is that that's a natural fear. It's part of this, because we've despiritualized our society, we've alienated ourselves from spiritual experiences, so we don't believe that we're safe when we do these kinds of things. But that doesn't mean that they're not legitimate or safe, right? Or even a means to a more safe mode of existence. And with me talking about grounding, it's not just grounding you back to that, it's grounding your expectations about those things and taking you back to earth. And I'm now hearing the song Back to Earth, to sort of say in writing maybe, what do I expect to happen when I think about the worst that could happen? And how can those subconscious blocks potentially influence my ability to do those things? There's a fantastic take by Lionel Snell / Ramsey Dukes on this. I think it's in How to See Fairies. I could be wrong, but it's in one of his books, and all of his books are fantastic, so do check them out. Not sponsored, just love him. Hello, Uncle Ramsey. But there's a thing of like, the fears that you hold, even if you can say logically that they are silly, or they come from horror movies, or they come from a background indoctrinated with Christianity or other similar, they stop you sometimes from having these clairs that we mentioned, you know, clairaudience, clairsentience, claircognizance, etc. Not because you don't have those skills or because the information can't come to you, but because there is a part of you that is resistant to that experience because you've been taught to be afraid of it. This is getting very deep, because this is almost talking about societal fears now. It's almost saying like, you are called to a spiritual path, you are called potentially to a psychic path, certainly to one of a more direct experiential version of mysticism within your particular religious or even atheistic paradigm, right? Because you could be completely skeptical, but in this for results magic type stuff, and that is totally valid as well. Welcome to the channel. But it's like all of the input you've had culturally up until this point is holding you back in some way and making you defensive, right? This is the card of fighting off invisible spectres. And I'm reminded that this particular character, his catchphrase is "got a light," right? And I know he's not the best. I know he's, again, evil is demonstrated in this pillar, and that's not reflective of the evils in the world so much as what you expect from the world right now. But when he says "got a light," it's almost like you saying, is there a fail-safe? Is there a safe word? Is there a mechanism to pull me back? What do I do when I encounter these things? And what I want to say is, yes, do your research into that within your paradigm, because there always is a safe word, there always is a fail-safe, there is always a technique to get you straight back into body and awake. But look into why you want to know those things in terms of what you think will happen if you don't know them, because that will tell you a lot about what's been holding you back. It could be even that you don't have an idea of external evil, or you're not projecting that anything will be too much for you. And instead, you just have a fear that you'll be so tuned in that you kind of merge with the all in this way that you can't pull back in the disparate notions of self that have sort of blended into the static in this really beautiful way. That's also justified. That's also a legitimate fear. That's fine. But again, from over 2 decades doing this stuff, arguably since I was 5, communicating with spirit, having OBEs, having really weird shit, partly because of a load of medical stuff that was going on with me very early, I can tell you now there's been maybe twice in my life that I've ever been scared by something I encountered through this path. And that is because once you're on the path, everything that I speak to, everything around you that wants you to be at your highest good, in line with your personal spiritual paradigm, being a good influence on the world, will protect you in what you're doing and will steer you to mentors, resources, gatherings of people, etc., that teach you the correct fail-safes or that give you the right advice. Indeed, in stumbling upon this reading, on some level, if you've gotten this far, you have trusted the universe to guide you to the correct person to talk about these things. And I would hope, without arrogance, that it has brought you to me because I am that person for now, right? And that it has also brought you to maybe looking into Ramsay Dukes, looking into Hemisync, looking into Twin Peaks as an illustration of magical paradigms, because it does get deep in that water, even if in other places it's problematic, right? Or a bit naff. But there's something here about you searching outside yourself for somebody to, I want to say, protect you from yourself in this. And that is both something that the universe is absolutely confirming to you and saying, we've got your back, don't worry, look at this reading. But also, it's something to examine within your own practice as to why it is that you feel you need that, what it is that you're afraid will happen. Because those places are the places that you are blocked from expanding your own, I want to say psychic skills, but your own spiritual expansion, your mystical techniques, your results-based mind reprogramming, whatever you want to call it, you know. And if you do believe in pagan gods or Jesus or, you know, whoever it is for you, beyond just universe, why is it that you think that they won't protect you from all this stuff flooding in? Or why is it that you think that you can spiral off kind of into space? I'm seeing, what's the actress in Gravity, where she's cut off, right? And she's just freewheeling into the cosmos, and it's terrifying. It's like, why do you think that that will be you when you believe in a higher power? Do you not think that that will pull you back in as a child of, I want to say a child of God, right? And that's not me trying to impose anything on you that you don't believe in. It's not me trying to make you do anything that you feel uncomfortable with. Because God knows if you go in feeling uncomfortable, you're more likely to encounter parasitic elements because they like discomfort, right? It's why they prey on the normies. Because they like energies that are not awakened enough to defend against them sort of feeding a bit. But at that same time, they're not usually that dangerous if you know how to deal with them. And I think you've reached a point in your spiritual journey where you're ready to learn how to do that. Or indeed, you're ready to learn to level up how to do that. And this is ongoing, you know. I mean, in my own practice, I've had experiences recently that, shall we say, took me out of my comfort zone. And that's after, as I say, almost lifelong craft work and at least 2 decades conscious practice. And there's stuff that's come up where I'm like, I need to read up on how to deal with that when that happens again, because I know it probably will. But that doesn't mean that, you know, the external world is evil, or that things are attacking me, or that there's anything that I'm unable to deal with. It's just it's the universe cueing me into, it's time to get a new set of mentors. It's time to add to your knowledge base. It's time to go deeper into technique. It's time to believe harder in your own power, in your own ability. It's time to trust harder in the things that you trust in. And that will differ for all of you. But this reading is kind of saying that same thing. With the Hermit reversed, I do feel, again, this is an echo of that message in saying it is time to look externally and go to a network or a mentor or something that is a bit more social, seeking the answers to the questions that this work will bring up for you. I want to say immediately after this reading might not be the best time. You might want to take a few days or weeks aside, depending on how afraid or fraught or whatever you feel, to really examine what these feelings and blockages are. Maybe to read how to see fairies. You don't have to believe in fairies, by the way, for it to be a useful book. It's just about unblocking yourself from your own magical paradigm and your own skill set, right? You can believe in the fae, the good folk, or you can not, but it's a useful structural thing to practice anyway, and just see what you get, right? And I want you to sort of think about those things in greater depth and then turn your eye outward once you know what you're asking for, right? Because this is very personal to you, and you'll know which bit you hit at, whether it's feeling overwhelmed, feeling like there is external evil, feeling like you're defending against maybe even living people in your life that are sending you a bit of iffiness, or just feeling like you want more control, or like you're frustrated with the block in the experience, you want to trust more. Whichever nuance you fall under will be made clear by further work on this. I want to say as well, because this ring is tingling, and this is, I bought it because it reminds me of like Gelfling stuff in the dark crystal. Really beautiful. You can get it on Etsy, I think, but it's a labradorite for anyone wondering, and that is to do with all of this. It's very helpful. But the reason that's tingling for me, I think, is because it might also be useful to look into fictional paradigms, whether that's Dark Crystal, Twin Peaks, or something entirely different, that seem occulty or magical or spiritual to you. Watch them again, look into them more, and figure out like what those things say about these things, or whether you can do, for some of you, like a chaos magic-y kind of a way of tapping into the fictional with statements of power that have impactful energy in the real. Good example of that adjacent to this is the bit in Labyrinth where Sarah tells Jareth, "You have no power over me," and his entire world crumbles. I'm also getting the bit in The Neverending Story where he calls the Empress by her right name, and it sort of changes the direction of things and affects the Nothing and Gmork and all that. So these kind of fantasy-based paradigms, or whatever it is that works for you, could even be horror for you, with this being a Halloween reading. These are going to bring in stuff that you can use in a way that makes you feel powerful on a mental and emotional level, which has an energetic impact. So what I want to say is, for some of you it's Psalms, but for others of you it's lines from Marvel movies, or it's, you know, sections from a witchcraft horror, or whatever it is. But there's some kind of hack there in terms of words to recite, rooms to visualize yourself entering into, all these kinds of things that will act as your failsafe while you're finding a failsafe in the real world, and while you're reaching out to others who do this kind of work and saying, hey, I seem to have come to a bit of a block. I think it's to do with these things. Can you help me out? For some as well, excuse me, more confirmation, wicked. For some, there is also a thing where those fictional resources and looking into the people who made them will actually bring you to esoteric or occult authors, or will send you on like a YouTube black hole to, you know, spiritual practitioners, new age speakers, etc., etc., who have the information that you need. God knows that a lot of my spiritual direction, as well as directly the occult community, has come from just looking into films about the esoteric over the years, watching interviews of various directors and writers and things, and then having a link in the sidebar that happens to be about a certain magician or a certain paradigm, and then you go down the rabbit hole, you know. And I think that was how I discovered Ramsey. It was how I discovered Rune Soup back in the day. I want to say it's how I got involved with Quarrier. All these kinds of things that interlink to stuff that shouldn't be related, but is now algorithmically connected, in the sense that the algorithm serves the larger synchronicity. It's a good shortcut to the information that you need. Indeed, it served you today in hearing from me and hearing about some of these things that I've touched on, which may be useful to you. With the last card being the King of Cups in reverse, I do think it's the last because this has gone on for a while. What I want to say is don't... Right, okay, so we've got the doctor of the town. I forget his name, but he's wonderful. And he's holding the caduceus, so there's a Raphael kind of vibe if you work with that as well. And he's in the medical paradigm, but he's floating on the typical King of Cups emotional landscape. He's in the stoic chair, balancing over his emotions, floating above the realm of the unconscious, except it's in reverse. I translate this to mean that if you want to be above the sort of emotional lack of control that you may feel when you're in embodied psychic states or out-of-body psychic states, for many of you, avoid the temptation to flip into a logical, a materialistic, or a medical paradigm in order to cope with what it is that you're emotionally and spiritually experiencing. That's not to say that these things aren't complementary to each other. A great deal of the best speakers I've ever heard on magic, on spirituality, many of whom were interviewed on Rune Soup, are people who are from a medical or scientific background, who discovered that there was more to this shit and started doing deep spiritual work adjacent to their logical, very swordsy kind of stuff, and discovered a happy medium between the worlds. Indeed, you can categorize people like Jung as this, or, you know, early astronomers, Ptolemy, over into Newton, who was also an astrologer, right? And then you get people like Einstein, who were mystics and who wanted to know more about God, but were in the scientific paradigm. There's a very long history of these two things being very simpatico. And again, Ramsey talks very well about how the scientific, the religious, the magical, and the artistic are all distinct, but all also Venn diagram with each other. That one's in, I forget the title, it's one of his more recent books. I'll link both down below. It's all well and good using a holistic, cross-paradigm understanding of all of these things. But what I don't want you to do is fall into that swordsy categorization of stuff because you are emotionally overwhelmed by the kinds of stuff you're experiencing or that you fear to experience. Note the psychic block, right? So your overall guidance in this is like, yes, turn to the outer world, but in the end, remember that this whole reading was a pull to the experiential. You have to be the hanged man at the end of the day. You can't theorize from what other people have said about what these experiences are like and develop your own entire cosmology with the same utility that you would if you were just doing it, right? It's the armchair magician thing. It's, yes, You can blend technicality with all of these much more earthy, much older ways of going about stuff. But try not to confuse the two or to blend the two to the extent that one or the other is diminished, right? In the same way that you fear that stuff coming in might be so intense for you that you mentally go off the rails, and that's a legitimate fear for many, there is also a sense that labeling and compartmentalizing and rationalizing and medicalizing some of these experiences actually inhibits your ability to receive what is true or to descend into the self with the utmost of trust in either yourself and your own power or a higher power, if that resonates for you. So I would say blend things, understand how one relates to the other. You know, I mentioned my own medical background and how I know that a lot of the reason I had OBEs and weird stuff was, you know, literally not being conscious or not being in my body or being on weird medications at very young stages and all that sort of stuff. But I've never medicalized myself out of the stuff that I've experienced. And as a result, I'm here talking to you now about this, having done 20 years of work of exploring these sort of more chthonic or indeed more astral realms, depending on whether you're going up or down, right? And I want to say, like, I've known as well people that have had what would be categorized as psychotic breaks because of magical work that they've been doing. And then I also know skeptics who've rationalized themselves out of all magical or mystical recognition of the greater lessons of their life path by poo-pooing what it is that they experienced because they feared it. Neither side is desirable when taken to the extreme, but if you're seeing this, you are a person who has the sense to balance both, because I've guarded this reading against going to the wrong kinds of people. If you're hearing me, you're ready to hear me. So again, trust yourself. Trust that diving deep and going in and sort of trusting your astral to explore the universe as is going to be beneficial for you, even if you have to approach it as a thought experiment at first to feel safe. Know that eventually that kind of knowledge does blend with more material stuff and that you won't appear mad all your life, right? Again, from experience. But also know that one paradigm is not a fail-safe against the other. In the same way that meditating won't cure an illness, medicalizing meditation won't actually diminish the experience of the mystical if you're meant to have it. And sometimes that experience of the mystical is something that feels very out of your depth at the time. It can occasionally be frightening if you're not used to it, or if you associate the things that you're seeing and feeling with, you know, paradigms of sin and evil or horror movies or the demonization of folk magical cultures around the world. But using your rationality to explore why those fears are there is more useful than using your rationality to dismiss any experience you've had or to categorize it as being dangerous in a way that frankly does nothing but incite religious hatred, right? And I think, again, like, you wouldn't be seeing Lynch and Frost if you didn't have this perfect balance between receiving and putting out. Lynch being the person who dives deep into the unconscious to bring up the ideas, as he talks about in Catching the Big Fish. Frost being a very technical, analytical person who reads conspiracy material, but then channels it into story which has a mystical component, and indeed takes very many people to a transcendent place. It's like they both have different directional angles on this, but they both know that it's a partly material, partly mystical process. And that's not to big up Twin Peaks if you're not into it, right? Because not everyone is. It's a very Marmite media, right? Particularly with some of the more problematic racial aspects and stuff, but what I want to say is that if you're seeing this, you know that you should be meditating, you know that you should be bringing in this stuff. What I want you to explore is where you think that may lead you in good and bad senses, and how you think you will relate to the outer world after, whether that's in a sense of having some fears about that, or even in a sense of having like a guru paradigm and thinking that you're going to be on top of everything and then sort of having to adjust and reassess, right? Because the other side of this is that, as I spoke about, this is a long process. I don't want to trigger any of you who, like me, have less time on this earth than your peers, but this takes work. It takes practice. It you know, particularly if you're using techniques without shortcuts, there will be a time investment here. There will be an emotional and energetic investment. And I'm telling you, it's worth it, right? But you've got to let it take the time that it takes and be patient with yourself and not presume that there's something wrong with you if the process is indeed slow and a little Saturnian in places. I hope that was useful to you. If it was, please like, subscribe, ding the dong, thank you kindly. There are several readings uploading on this day that you're watching this if you're seeing it live. And indeed, if you're not seeing it live, I have been doing YouTuber, so there's a full playlist just for this month. But then also on my channel, there are playlists of love readings, playlists of A to Z lucky dips, where we pull a word out of an envelope and read on that, using cards, using birdseed, using ink in water, all kinds of stuff. I'm also open, as I said in the beginning, to you putting down in the comments any readings you would like to see, anything you would like particular guidance on it that would be generally applicable to a broader audience. Or if you want to get really specific, particularly in a ritualistic or magical sense, you can book with me in my shop. The link is down below. Whatever you choose to do, you know, save this reading somewhere, take the influences from it that I've been talking about, maybe look up some of the authors, some of the techniques, that kind of stuff. And I hope to see you again soon. But I wish you not even the best of luck, but the deepest of trust on your magical journey. I think you're not going to see this unless it's part of your role in this lifetime to explore this safely, right? So you will get there. You will receive these things. I think you've just come to a bit where your progress is a bit frustrating. As with all things that are worth doing, we have times that are fast, times that are slow. And I wish you the speediest of incoming information. And as I say, faith, trust, and in the end, fulfillment. Take care, my dudes.